Hello, Blackhawks fans. Welcome to Blackhawks Daily, your favorite recap of the daily buzz around your Chicago Blackhawks. I'm your host, PJ. Thanks for tuning in. As we know, it's an extremely slow and dry off season, and if you've noticed, I'm kind of wearing the same clothes as yesterday's video, and that's because I'm going to Lala, so I'm cranking out 2 videos today. This one, we're just going to talk about the dynasty of the Hawks from the last decade. Because they played some of the most impactful historical games of the last 100 years in that decade, as well as one of the most disappointing. So let's talk about that. We're going to start with 2010, the Stanley Cup in Philly, the goal that only Kane saw. So the drama leading up to this was, first of all, there's goaltending uncertainty. We had Antti Niemi. He was a rookie. If you remember, the little guy from Finland. He had been solid, but he had been pretty inconsistent during the playoffs. So there was concern whether he could handle that pressure. The Flyers also had mounted a really strong comeback in the series, and they were rallying behind Mike Richards. If you remember him, he was solid that series, as well as Danny Briere. Really hot touch on scoring. Chicago's defense with Seabrook and Keith were just logging some massive minutes. The Hawks were 1 win away from ending a 49-year drought. So lots of pressure on Taves and Kane to deliver. And, because both of them were seen, rightfully so, as the new faces of our historic franchise. Taves, though, was cold, right? He hadn't scored a goal in the final. There was a lot of concern whether he could show up in the biggest moment. We didn't know. And, obviously no one knew because later on that night he'd be winning the Conn Smythe. So in overtime of Game 6, and the date was June 9th, right? So in overtime of Game 6, the score tied 3-3. Kane skated down the left wing, shot off a low angle shot, and he was like almost all the way to the back, right, where of the red line, and went right under Michael Leighton's pads, and it stuck on the back of his padding at the back of the net. Didn't bounce out, right? So we didn't see it. I remember watching that goal. I remember him going around the back of the goal, throwing his gloves off and celebrating, and I'm like, what's wrong with Kane? But he was like the only person who really knew that he had scored, and then all of a sudden you can watch everyone just start flipping out, getting out in the center ice. Even the officials took several seconds to find out and confirm that the goal was in. It mattered because it ended a 49-year championship drought. The last one was in 1961. It was the first cup for the team in the salary cap era. It launched a modern Blackhawks dynasty, re-energized hockey in Chicago. Kane became an instant legend, obviously. Taves wins the Conn Smythe for playoff MVP. And it was considered one of the most dramatic cup-winning goals in NHL history. So it was amazing to watch. I'm sure you remember where you were. I remember where I was. It was amazing. Let's take a look at number 2. That would be the 2013 Stanley Cup Final against Boston. Now, this is June 24th, 2013. I'm going to set up the drama, but I'll get into that in a minute. So Patrice Bergeron on Boston, he had a mystery injury, right? He's one of their best two-way players, a center. He was battling upper body injury, right? Internal injuries. He actually had a punctured lung and broken ribs. Jesus, which was nuts. So he was questionable for Game 6. He still played, but obviously was not 100%. Taves had missed the entire third period of Game 5, the previous game, after taking a big hit. His status for Game 6 was uncertain until just before puck drop, but he returned and played a key role, including an assist on the tying goal. Multiple players were banged up, both teams suffering deep playoff fatigue and injuries. Shaw was playing with a facial injury, if you remember. He took a puck to the face. The Bruins were missing Greg Campbell and had defensemen, doing a lot of time on the ice. It had been a bruising, very tight checking series. The games had been decided by 1 goal. The pressure was immense, and everyone kind of thought, as this series was going on, this game was going to overtime. After a slow start in the playoffs, though, Kane had caught fire late in the Western Conference Final and was building some Conn Smythe momentum. So that's something to keep tabs on. So this game had been dubbed the 17-second miracle. So trailing 2-1 late in the third period, Boston looked like they were gonna win it. With 1:16 left in the third, Bickle, our guy we just talked about the other day, he tied the game off of a beautiful feed from Taves. 17 seconds later, Dave Bolin buries the go-ahead goal off a rebound off the backboards. The Bruins were stunned. The home crowd taken completely out of it. The comeback was one of the most improbable and exhilarating in Stanley Cup final history. It earned Chicago its second championship in 4 seasons. Corey Crawford was huge in goal. He was amazing. Taves, Kane, and Bickle were all huge contributors. And this time, Patrick Kane ended up winning the Conn Smythe. The 17 seconds became synonymous with the Blackhawks' clutch ability and resilience. And that final minute burst is still shown regularly on NHL highlight reels. It's the defining image of the franchise's golden era, and it's considered the Blackhawks' finest game in their entire 100-year history. So, of course, that's debatable, but it certainly deserves to be kind of right at the top there. So, we had one of the best games in their history, and let's talk about one of the worst. And that would be the very next year, the 2014 Western Finals, Game 7, against the LA Kings. So the drama of this one leading up to the Kings was huge, right? You had 2 modern dynasties, elite rosters, lots of fatigue, lots of emotion and legacy on the line. The Kings had taken a pretty commanding 3-1 lead in the series, including an overwhelming 5-2 win in Game 4. Chicago, facing elimination, stormed back in Game 5 with a 5-4 double overtime win with Seabrook getting the winner, and then took Game 6 in LA 4-3 to force a Game 7. So we come back home, we're feeling good, right? 2 teams had met the previous year in a conference final, Blackhawks taking it in 5. This time the Kings were stronger and hungrier and more experienced. It was arguably the true Stanley Cup of 2014, even though this was just a Western Conference Finals. The Blackhawks had won the Cup in 2010 and 2013. The Kings had won it in 2012. So the winner of this series would be playing for the second Cup in 3 seasons and a place in modern NHL history. Many hockey writers think this is the greatest Western Conference Final ever. And you knew when you were watching it was going to be a classic. So both teams are going through emotional wars from the earlier rounds. The Kings had already played 2 Game 7s in the playoffs, both on the roads. They beat the Hawks after being down 0-3, and they beat the Ducks. The Blackhawks had big battles through the Blues and the Wild, both tight series. Duncan Keith, Drew Doughty, Brent Seabrook, Slava Voinov were all playing massive minutes every night. Taves, Kane, Anze Kopitar, Jeff Carter were all visibly fatigued, and but they're still delivering. Kane had been quiet early in the series, but came alive with 7 points, 2 goals, 5 assists in Game 5 and Game 6 combined, so showing his vintage clutch for Mr. Kane. And the chemistry with Brandon Saad and Shaw reignited the offense at a perfect time. The Kings had blown a 3-1 series lead, and that fact carried an immense weight going into Game 7 on the road in one of the NHL's loudest arenas. Chicago, by contrast, had the experience of multiple Game 7 wins and was 7-0 at home in Game 7s in franchise history at that point. So we were really feeling pretty good about it. And Daryl Sutter, Joe Quenneville, both gunning for the second Cup, and they had tremendous mutual respect. They were really good at keeping lineup changes and injuries very guarded. Marian Hossa was nursing an undisclosed injury. There was just so much going on, and the atmosphere at the UC was really electric. So in the game, why it's considered the most disappointing? Well, the Blackhawks were the defending Stanley Cup champions. They had just mounted a huge comeback, coming down 3-1, going into Game 7 at home. We had all the momentum. We had one of the best cores in NHL history: Taves, Kane, Sharp, Keith, Hossa, Seabrook, and Crawford. And we fall in overtime, one win short of getting back to the Stanley Cup. It was back and forth. We led 2-0, and then we ended up leading 3-2, and then later 4-3. Patrick Sharp scoring twice. The Kings tied it late in the third, forced overtime. And then in overtime, Alex Martinez's point shot deflected off of Nick Leddy's arm, squirted past Corey Crawford with 5 minutes and 47 seconds in overtime. There was almost no celebration at first, basically mimicking what happened in Philadelphia in 2010. So it killed us, right? The Kings went on to win the Stanley Cup against the Rangers, but many felt if the Chicago was there, we would have beaten the Rangers. And it was just one of the players and the fans consider it one of the most physically and emotionally exhausting series they've ever experienced. So, I'm tired just thinking about it. All right, last but not least, the Stanley Cup Finals 2015, June 15th, against Tampa. Blackhawks obviously leading 3-2 coming into Game 6. Ben Bishop, in the beginning of the series, their goalie, Tampa Bay's goalie, Ben Bishop, was basically unstoppable. Like, you could not get past him. He was huge in the net, super nimble. And I remember being very worried that we were not able to get past him. Tampa Bay was fast. They were a very, very fast team. But Bishop, he suffered an injury in Game 2 and was a game-time decision the rest of the series. So he had returned, but he clearly wasn't 100%. His mystery injury later on, torn groin. Kind of important for a goalie. Ugh. That just gives me the shivers just thinking about it. It was the tightest final in years. Games 1 through 5 were all one-goal games. Neither team scored more than 2 goals a game. And analysts had noted that it was one of the closest finals in decades. Trevor Van Riemsdyk was injured. We were playing essentially with just 4 defensemen. We had Keith, Seabrook, Jarmelson, and Oduya. 90% of the time. They played 90% of the minutes, those 4. Duncan Keith was averaging over 30 minutes a game. Patrick Kane had been quiet, like, offensively throughout the final. So there was questions about his health and about his confidence. And there was rumblings that the Lightning's speed had basically neutralized our offense. The Hawks hadn't won a cup at home since 1938. And the energy was enormous, obviously. So everyone was on the edge of their seats. So what happened? Well, we won, right? We ended up beating them 2-0 to capture our 3rd Stanley Cup in 6 years. Duncan Keith scored the opening goal in the second period, following up on his own rebound. And then Patrick Kane comes through, seals the game late in the third with a clean finish on a Jonathan Taves setup. Corey Crawford posted a shutout in one of the best games of his wonderful career. So it marked the first championship, the Blackhawks' first championship on home ice in 77 years. Very cathartic for us. It solidified the franchise as the dominant team of the decade. Duncan Keith this time was awarded the Conn Smythe after averaging over 31 minutes a game in the playoff and scoring some key goals. The post-game celebrations at the United Center for that game was still regarded as the loudest and most euphoric in team history. I was in Chicago, obviously watching. I wish I was there. It would have been such a party. So, hey, thank you for coming down memory lane with me this time, guys. It's a wrap today. Hope you enjoyed us waxing nostalgic about the dynasty and about those years where the love for the Hawks and all of that energy was just so intense. Can't wait for us to get back to that soon with this rebuild. So, enjoy your weekend. I hope, now that the weather's broken, I hope that you guys have a fantastic weekend. We'll come back next week strong. Please tune in every weekday for your Blackhawks Daily Download. And thank you so much for tuning in and supporting the channel. Let's keep supporting the Hawks. Let's keep supporting this great city. And I'll see you next time on Blackhawks Daily.